breakout group 1 may want to start with giving a brief summary of what they discussed. That was the group that I was in. Who was, I think, Wei Xin, or what your name is, was going to do this. Did I get this correctly?
Sorry, you're talking to me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry. Okay, so our group talked through a few of the questions. We sort of started with the low-hanging fruit of the first question of should all data be public, and we sort of came to the philosophical idea that it should. But then the second question was very easily answered as well. Is it always practical? No, it's not always practical. There are often physical reasons or practical reasons for jobs and so on. So it was often the case that there was some limitation that meant that it wasn't possible. And then the question came up, well, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to reward it? Not necessarily in monetary terms, but the credit for the effort of making this open and accessible was always a bit of a challenge. The credit, whether it's in terms of citations, and because of the odd metrics that sometimes you get used as heuristics for hiring decisions or funding decisions and so on. We talked about how some of the big funding bodies, NASA, NSF, and ERC, are moving that way and looking at more of the DORA approaches, so we can put this data up there, make it accessible to the community, and give appropriate credit for that. That was potentially helpful, because that means that research can be reproducible. And there was another discussion that went on for a while about how to actually do that, because as code gets upgraded, as data and calibrations get upgraded, that has an impact on what can be reproduced. So there was talk about using Docker and particular versioning and making sure that is accessible, but that is an, again, additional overload, additional load of work that has to be considered and has to be given credit for. Then if we talked towards the end about the theoretical work, someone publishes a paper that says they have this wonderful model that does all these lovely things, and then says either I've got this data, this code, and if you want to collaborate on it, you can contact me, or just doesn't put a link to the code. Then the question became, well, why should we believe them? Why should a referee say that this input produces that output when they can't see the mechanism? So it was that sort of question, and there does seem to be some of the journals, again, the discussion came up that some of the journals are moving that way, that at the very least are expecting that people publish the code, even if they're not quite at the point of then running testing on that code. But it's not all of the journals, and it's sort of an open discussion. So I think we had more of an open discussion than sort of coming to conclusions on that point. And I hope I've talked clearly enough. I know I talk quite fast, but there's a lot of points to get through, and I don't want to take all the much time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so in the view of the time, we should probably move on and see if we have some time for questions at the end. Room 2, who is your representative who's gonna give the presentation?
I will be summarizing our notes here. We had quite an exciting discussion of not really one of the questions in the suggested topics, but quite a few of them together. The general idea was asking about how can data be shared, whose responsibility should it be, and what kinds of challenges are faced when implementing some of these ideas. So we discussed how the idea that somebody mentioned yesterday about data management plans for institutions rather than individuals or for individual surveys is an excellent idea. It allows individual researchers in the institution to have access to resources that have been planned on an institute-wide level. And there are existing examples of this as well that we could look at. As far as the question, how should data be shared? There are a lot of options currently available, but also a lot others that could be implemented when it comes to, especially to sharing raw data. It becomes a problem with larger surveys that individual researchers may not have the resources to host local versions of this raw data. So in those cases, it would be nice if the facilities would make better, would allow better automated access to such raw data as well. And a difference has to be made between research level and facility level data sharing. So the facility level data sharing would allow better access to raw data so that the individuals do not have to store these. And the ESO model was discussed as a good example of this. As far as tables and papers, we should make it easier for the authors to be able to automatically make these available on facilities such as Vizier. And one of the issues with sharing code is that there's time constraints and not all of it can be made compatible. Maybe even if it is made compatible right now, it may not be compatible in a few years. So these are some issues that we discussed. We also discussed the problems with things like making Docker containers available, but they also discussed some possible solutions to it, which I think Mohammed will be discussing in his talk tomorrow. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And was there a room 3 or not? I'm a bit confused now.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we just switched order slightly.
Okay.
So I'll fill in what happened in our room. So we decided to focus mainly on the question of how can we take away the fear of getting scooped that people sometimes have, because some of us have heard that from a lot of people. And so it seems to be kind of common. So there were a couple of, I guess, main takeaway points that came out of that. The first was about messaging to the community when we're sort of telling people about why they should share stuff. We need to focus on the positives and actually show people clear cases of positive outcomes for the people sharing data, so that they're not, they don't only have to work with the fear of, oh, well, if I release my code or data, someone else can take it and use it. The other part of that, though, is that we actually need a good understanding of how often someone sharing their code or their data does lead to them being scooped, because there's a lot of people who are very active about sharing their resources have never had that issue, and actually some of them, at least anecdotally, find that sharing their resources actually makes it less likely that they'll get scooped because people know what they're doing. And the final part of that was all about attribution. And so if people know that they will get attribution for their work, get credit for everything that they do, they'll be hopefully less worried that someone will take their work and do something else with it, because at least they'll have to get the credit for having done something which contributed to another person or another group's work. And so how you cite work and how you tell people to cite your work is important. So I'm just briefly going to share my screen so people can see several members of the group contributed some useful resources. The links are here. We'll make sure those are available to everyone, covering some cool, useful information or use cases or tools you can use to make it easier for people to acknowledge your work and cite you. So I think those are the main takeaway points for us. Thanks.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you all the representatives for giving the summaries of the different breakout sessions. Are there any sort of final comments related to this breakout session that people want to make? Any final thoughts? One thing that occurred to me was whether we think that it will actually attract more citations if work is reproducible. They think that it will actually benefit the authors in this way, that if they produce a reproducible study, that people will cite it more. Is there any evidence of this? I mean, my intuition says that this would be true, but don't know.
Citation, the problem with citation analysis is that there's so many biases on it that, like, I think this one gets completely washed out by the other types of biases. Like, when people just put one paragraph of citations, they don't really care about how a result was got. They just, it's just like, a copy paste from their previous paper. They just put everything. Many people don't pay attention.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments?
I have a question. One of the other groups reporting mentioned data management plans for institutes and said that there are resources available for that. Can somebody share links? That would be super helpful.
Yes. Now there were the links in the yesterday's talk, but I will also mention this in the breakout session. There's RDA, Research Data Alliance, and they produce. If you go in the RDA, they have a lot of resources for this for various models of data management plans. And the Netherlands has been particularly active in this front and has even a government-wide recommendation. So many institutes, not just in astronomy, in the Netherlands especially, follow those models. So RDA is one place, and you'll see many work packages there and interest groups that are that are focused on this.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, let's stop the discussion.